Kicked out my best friend after she claimed my husband would relapse, ignoring our years of recovery and transformation. My husband 42 and I 40 have been married for 10 years. Our story started way back when I was 15 and he was 17. Growing up, both of us endured our fair share of trauma. Our childhoods weren't easy, far from it. When you're young and hurting, you look for anything to dull the pain, and for us, that turned out to be alcohol. We fell into unhealthy patterns, and by the time we were together as teenagers, addiction had its claws deep in both of us. Those early years were a mess, there's no sugarcoating it. We hurt each other, even though we never meant to. My best friend, who's known me my entire life, witnessed every chaotic twist of that relationship. She saw me at my worst and stuck around, so she knows how dark things got and how lost both of us were. After about 4 years of trying and failing to make it work, my husband and I separated. It was necessary. We were toxic together, and our pain went just feeding it off each other. 4 years, we lived apart, each of us on our own journey to sobriety. I went through rehab, therapy, threw myself into awe. He did the same, in his own time, in his own way. We didn't reconnect until much later, after we each proven to ourselves we could stand on our own 2 feet. By the time we found our way back to each other, we were different people. We were clean, steady, healthier, and we promised ourselves that if we ever got married, it would be because we were ready, truly ready to build something good together. And we did. We waited until we were both solid in our recovery before walking down the aisle. Meanwhile, my best friend ended up moving to another country for work. We kept in touch, constant messages, video chats, the occasional deep, late-night phone call. She couldn't make it to our wedding, money was tight on both sides and tickets were just too expensive. I never held it against her. One thing that always stood out was that she never once voiced concern about my husband, not a whisper, not a hint that she had doubts about him or his recovery. Fast forward to a couple days ago. She was visiting town, and I invited her over to catch up. My husband wasn't home, he had an meeting. Despite the years, we both still go. It grounds us, keeps us accountable, and helps us keep perspective on how far we've come. The afternoon started off perfectly. We were cooking together, laughing, sharing stories, just soaking up each other's company after so long apart. She eventually asked where my husband was, and I told her about the meeting. That's when things shifted. She rolled her eyes and muttered, "He still goes?" Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I tried to shrug it off, awkwardly answering, yeah. Of course." Then she launched into this tirade about how people like that don't really change and how all alcoholics eventually relapse. She claimed she was worried about me, warning that I was putting myself at risk all over again. She insisted she'd seen this before. It stung because she talked about my husband like he was still the angry, reckless boy from our teenage years, as if the years of work we'd both put in didn't count for anything. She even started crying, insisting I wasn't listening, and wildly claimed he was going to relapse and kill me. That accusation cut me deep. He's never been physically violent, not even when we were drowning in addiction. I tried to remind myself that she was scared for me, maybe genuinely trying to protect me in her own way, but her words felt like betrayals. She wasn't just insulting him, she was erasing all the work I'd done, too, as if none of it mattered. After about 20 minutes of this, I felt trapped. I was overwhelmed and utterly triggered. Every part of me wanted to run. Instead, I took a breath and, as calmly as I could manage, told her I needed her to leave. The look on her face, shock, hurt, made me want to crumble, but she didn't argue. She just gathered her things and left. Now, I sit here replaying everything. Did I overreact? Could I have been more patient, tried to de-escalate instead of shutting her out? There's a voice in my head chiding me for being too harsh, but another, steadier voice reminds me that what she said crossed a line. My husband and I have fought tooth and nail to get where we are. We've built something real, and we fight for it every day. Sometimes, even the people who love us most don't see how hard we're trying. I just wish she could see that, too. Words made me feel, without attacking, using those I felt statements I'm never quite comfortable with but know are important. This morning, I decided to try. I FaceTimed her. The first thing she said was, "So have you finally calmed down and moved on from all that?" I bit my tongue and tried to keep my voice steady. I told her that I wasn't calling to argue, but because I needed her to understand how deeply what she said had hurt me, not just because of my husband, but because I'm also a recovering alcoholic. I still go to my meetings. When she dismissed my husband, it felt like she dismissed me, too. She started to cry again, very quickly this time. I remembered some things people had said about possible projection, so I tried to ask if something had happened, if maybe someone else in her life had struggled, something had triggered her, if there was something she hadn't told me yet. She got immediately defensive, said no, and then told me flat out she would never do what I did and be with a man like that. We talked for over an hour, but it mostly felt like running in circles. At one point, she said she only trusts alcoholics she knows me, because she knows I won't relapse. I tried to tell her, that's not how recovery works. There's never a 0% chance for anyone, even me. That's why I still keep showing up to meetings, why it matters so much to take things seriously after all these years. That's when she finally admitted she's never liked my husband. That hurt so much more than I expected. They'd spent years joking, talking, acting like there was nothing wrong between them. She never said a word about having any problem with him, nothing until now. Hearing her say that out loud, after more than 20 years of friendship, felt like being betrayed out of nowhere. And she kept doubling down. She insisted she knows how this ends, said she's utterly convinced my husband is going to relapse and kill me because she's seen what he's capable of. I have to make this clear, my husband has never been violent, not once in all our years together, not even in our darkest days of addiction. He has never raised his voice at me, never hurt me. Back then, everything was just sadness and exhaustion, nothing like what she's describing. I tried over and over again to meet her halfway, because she's my best friend, and she's been by my side for more than half my life. But each time I reached out, she only dug herself in deeper, refusing to budge or see us as anything but doomed. I told her I loved her, and I genuinely do hope she finds some peace, but I had to say I can't keep someone in my life who only sees the worst in us and won't acknowledge any change or growth. I wished her well and hung up. That's where everything stands now. It hurt so much. I truly did not expect this from her, of all people. But I'm starting to realize that some people just get stuck on an old, broken version of you, and no matter how much you grow, they don't want to let it go. I'll really never understand why she waited until 10 years into my marriage to bring all this up, if she's always felt this way. Update 2. I thought the FaceTime would be the end of it. I was wrong. Last night my husband came home earlier than usual from his meeting, pale and jittery in a way I hadn't seen in years. He poured himself a ginger ale with both hands, took a breath, and told me she had shown up. She'd found the meeting on the public list same day, same time, and sat in the back for the first half, just staring at him. When they broke for coffee, she followed him outside and told him, in this flat, controlled voice, that he needed to do the right thing and leave me before he killed me. He said he tried to keep his voice even, told her he wasn't going to have that conversation outside of a meeting he needs to go to, and a couple of guys he knows stepped over to make sure everything stayed calm. She said she would keep coming until it sunk in. He left early. Hearing it made my skin go cold. Before I could even figure out what to say back to him, my phone lit up with a call from my mom. Apparently my friend had called her too, to warn her. My mom loves me, but she's anxious on a good day, and by the time I got off that call I felt wrung out and furious in a way that scared me. I texted my friend something I never thought I'd type to her: do not contact my husband, do not contact my family, do not show up at any of our meetings again. If you want to talk to me, it has to be with my sponsor present. Otherwise, we are done. She didn't reply for hours. When she finally did, it wasn't a text. It was an email, longer than anything I've ever seen from her, and reading it felt like getting dragged through time with the air knocked out of me. I'm not going to repeat everything she wrote, I don't think I could if I tried, but this is the part that changed everything. When she moved abroad, she met someone. He was a few years older, handsome, sober, the stable one at his home group, and he relapsed. He relapsed hard. She didn't tell me because she said she was embarrassed she hadn't spotted it. She said one night he was drunk enough to be mean and careless and he shoved her in their kitchen. She fell. There was a lot more in there that I'm not going to put on the internet, but it ended with her leaving without telling anyone and then finding out months later he died from an overdose. She said she decided then that this is how it ends for men like my husband, for people like us. I sat with that for a while, just staring at the screen until the words blurred. I felt sorry for her in a way that made my throat ache, and I still couldn't get past the fact that she had taken that pain and weaponized it at us. I forwarded the email to my sponsor, and he suggested we try meeting her somewhere public with someone neutral. My husband didn't want me to go alone. So this afternoon we met her at a diner we used to haunt when we were kids, the one with the red vinyl booths and the jukebox that never works. She looked exhausted. You know when someone has been crying for so long their eyes look grainy? Like that. She hugged herself when she saw us and then froze like she wasn't sure what to do with her arms. I could smell vodka under a peppermint. That part hit me in the gut more than anything she wrote. I asked if she wanted coffee. She said water. She kept wiping the condensation ring like she needed to control something. I told her I got her email and I was sorry for what she went through, genuinely sorry. She nodded like she wanted to accept that, and then she started in again about my husband, but this time it wasn't a tirade, it was pleading. She said she can't go to sleep anymore without picturing me on a morgue table. She said she wakes up and checks my WhatsApp to see if I've read her messages because she needs to know I'm not dead. She said that when she saw him walk up to that church last night her whole chest seized and she wanted to throw herself in front of him like she could stop a train. It was grief wearing anger like armor, and it was spilling everywhere. My sponsor was with us, quiet, just listening the way he does, and after she ran out of words he asked if she'd be willing to sit in on an open meeting tonight, not his, not my husband's, just one across town or an Al-Anon meeting if she'd rather not be around. She laughed and then covered her mouth like she'd shocked herself. I don't need that, she said, and then she reached into her purse to get a tissue and a little metal flask clanked against her phone. We all heard it. She went still in this horrible, brittle way, and for a second it felt like we were in a photograph. No one made a scene. No one grabbed it. She unscrewed the top like she was trying to prove something to all of us and then stopped with it halfway to her mouth and set it down. The diner's fluorescent light made her hands look almost translucent. I'm not like you, she whispered. I could stop anytime. She was crying without moving her face. I don't know how else to describe it. I told her I loved her and I wasn't going to argue with her about what she is or isn't, but I can't let her break into the parts of my life that keep me standing. I said if she wanted help, we would help right now, today, rides, numbers, sitting with her outside a meeting, whatever. If she didn't, we were done. No more calling my family. No more parking lots. No more threats dressed up as care. She stared at me for a long time and then said, very flat, if you pick him, you lose me. I said, I'm picking me. I don't know where that came from. It just came out. She laughed again, that broken sound, and then she got up and walked out, leaving the flask on the table like it was a tip. We sat there until the coffee went cold. My sponsor took the flask and handed it to the waitress to toss so no one else would deal with it, and then we went home and fed the cat and did the kind of mindless chores you do when you're trying to keep your hands from shaking laundry, dishes, wiping down a counter that was already clean. My husband called the guy who runs his meeting and let him know what happened so they could keep an eye out, and he's going to hit a different group for a little while. He looked at me over a pile of towels and said, I'm okay. It sounded small and brave. An hour ago she texted me that she booked an earlier flight back. 10 minutes after that I got another text, this one from a number I didn't recognize. It was a counselor from a treatment center near the airport. My friend had given them my number as an emergency contact. She'd checked herself in for a 3-day evaluation, said she was not okay and needed to talk to someone who wasn't me. I stood in the kitchen reading that over and over until my husband came up behind me and put his chin on my shoulder like he used to when we were teenagers and the world felt too big. I don't know what happens next. I know I meant what I said about boundaries. I also know I hope she finds a way out of the place she's stuck in. Update 3. The counselor called back the next morning and said she'd sign the release if I wanted to come in for a brief family session before they decided on next steps. I said yes before the sensible part of my brain could start spinning what ifs. My husband asked if I wanted him there and I did, so the two of us drove to the center by the airport, the one that looks like a canceled hotel. The lobby had that humming vent white noise and a vending machine with the lights half burned out. He sat with a crossword he found crumpled under a chair arm and kept filling in the wrong clues on purpose just to make me roll my eyes. It worked for a minute. They took me back first. She was in a small room with a window that didn't open and a table that had been buffed so hard it was more smear than shine. The bracelet around her wrist made a soft rasp against the laminate when she moved. She looked like she hadn't slept all year and also somehow like a kid at the nurse's office, waiting to be told she could go back to class. Her counselor was a woman with the kind of voice that makes you unclench your jaw without meaning to. There were little white cups everywhere, water, coffee gone cold, one with juice melted into pink sugar at the bottom. My friend's hands were steadier than at the diner, but she was pressing her thumb into her palm like she was trying to leave a fingerprint on herself. She said hi. She said my name like she was testing the word for cracks. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper out of her pocket and told me she wrote something because talking always gets away from her. She read it with her eyes on the paper the whole time. It was an apology letter, not exactly, not the big sweeping kind tied up with a bow. It was jagged. It was honest in places that made me want to look somewhere else. She said she's been drinking sweet drinks on airplanes for years because somehow it doesn't count if it comes with a stirrer. She said she lied when she said she couldn't afford the ticket to our wedding. She had the money, and then she didn't, And then she was in a place a lot like this one for a week that turned into 3, and she couldn't imagine standing there sober next to me without feeling like her skin was too tight. She said she keeps a photo of me in her phone favorites because it makes her feel protected, and she also throws the phone into pillows sometimes when my little green dot says online, and she doesn't know why that makes her angry. She said she followed my husband to the church because she thought fear could be a leash. She said it out loud. She didn't make excuses for it. I watched the counselor watching me to see where the words were landing. She looked up at me for the first time at the end and said, very small, "I don't like who I'm around you right now." The counselor asked if I wanted to say anything. I told her I heard her, and I believe she meant it, and I loved her, and I wasn't going to pretend any of this didn't happen. My husband came and then. He kept his hands in his pockets like he was afraid of touching the wrong patch of air. She turned to him and the muscles in her face did something I can't describe except to say it looked like breaking and mending at the same time. She said, "I'm sorry I put your sobriety in my mouth like a weapon." He nodded once and said, "I'm going to be all right whether you believe it or not. I hope you're going to be all right too." It wasn't a speech. It was just true. The counselor talked about options. Detox is a door, not a house, and she could walk through to a short residential program if she chose. My friend kept looking at the window. Her knee was bouncing. She said she wanted to go home. She said she wanted a sandwich. She said she wanted to vomit. She said, over and over again, that she didn't want to be like us, and every time she said us she flinched like she'd stepped on a live wire. The counselor didn't push. She looked at me and asked if we could put our boundaries in writing here, not because paper is magic, but so there's something to point to when your brain starts bargaining with you at 3 a.m. I said what I'd already said in the diner, and my husband added that she doesn't come to our meetings, any of them, ever, and she doesn't call our families about us, and if she wants to talk to me, it stays with my sponsor involved. The counselor rephrased it until it sounded like a plan instead of a threat. My friend signed it with a pen you can only click once. She dug into her tote bag and pulled out a keychain I hadn't seen in years, a plain silver thing with a tiny scratch down the middle. It was the spare to my first apartment, the one with a slanted floor and the dishwasher that just redistributed food. She said she'd found it at the bottom of an old coat and had been wearing it like a charm, and she didn't want to be a person who carries keys to parts of my life she isn't allowed in. I didn't know what to do with my face. I took it. It was heavier than I remembered. On the way out, the counselor asked if we'd consider coming to an open family night next week, not to speak, just to sit, because sometimes having a familiar shape in the back row is the thing that keeps a newcomer from bolting. My husband looked at me and I looked at him, and we both nodded like we were hearing the same song far away. As soon as we got to the car, I cried the way you cry when you stub your toe sudden and stupid and out of proportion, and actually not at all. We went home the long way so we didn't have to drive past the church. The cat had knocked over a plant and then tried to cover the spill with a dish towel like a tiny guilty person. We cleaned dirt out of the grout with a toothbrush and didn't talk much. My phone kept lighting up with numbers I didn't recognize, and I let them all go to voicemail until one of them left a message saying it was her counselor again and she'd made a decision. She's staying. 28 days to start. I played that message twice just to hear the steadiness in the woman's voice rub up against the sag. I put the key on the hook by the door and then took it off and put it in a drawer because the idea of it hanging there felt like a lie I hadn't figured out the shape of yet. At 2:11 a.m. The center called me anyway. She was crying and not trying to hide it and asked me to come get her. She said the ceiling tiles looked like mouths. She said the bed was too loud. She said she could do this at home. I sat on the edge of my tub because the tile was cold and felt like ballast, and I told her no. I told her I loved her and I wasn't getting in the car and she could hate me if she needed to, and she hung up on me. I put my phone face down on the bath mat and watched the little notification light blink like a heartbeat and didn't pick it up until it stopped. In the morning there was another voicemail from the counselor saying it had passed, that they'd given her tea and one of those sand-filled fidget things and walked her back through about 5 minutes at a time until she could see the next 5. She asked if we'd bring a sweater when we came to family night, something familiar that didn't smell like airports. I took the blue one she stole from me in our 20s and then forgot to return for a decade, washed it twice and left it in the sun to dry because for some reason it felt important that it smelled like outside and laundry and not like me. We went. The room was full of those chairs that leave little dimples in your thighs and posters about hold tack to corkboard. A man talked about the first time he woke up and didn't want to. A woman with a French braid kept twisting a tissue until it came apart. My friend didn't see us at first. When she did, she looked surprised, then angry, then something I can only name as relieved, which is apparently what my heart does when it gets returned to me in new language. After, she didn't come over. We didn't go to her. We left the sweater with her counselor. On the way to the parking lot, the air smelled like jet fuel and citronella from the Rehab's cheap patio candles. My husband squeezed my wrist and said, "We're okay." It still sounded small. It still sounded brave. The night, a package showed up with no return address. Inside was a red plastic bracelet they put on you when you check in somewhere with beeping machines, cut clean through, and a note the size of an index card with 3 words on it in her tight, accountant handwriting, "Day 3, staying." I put the bracelet with the key in the drawer and shut it gently like it was sleeping. I don't know what the next card will say. I know I'm not writing it for her. I am, finally, writing mine for me. Update 4. 2 strange things arrived on the same morning like they'd planned it. The first was a voicemail from the counselor asking if we could bring a couple photos for her timeline group because sometimes faces make the words come out steadier. The second was an email from a woman with my friend's dead boyfriend's last name, soft and formal, saying she'd found my address, then a file, and there was a small box she'd been wanting to send for a long time. She didn't know where my friend was. She hoped, wherever she was safe. The box was already at the UP's place by the highway. I could pick it up if I wanted, or she could have it sent back if this was too much. I called the counselor and told her about the box. She said, if my friend consented, we could open it together there. I pictured my friend's face at the diner, that brittle stillness right after the flask clanked, and my stomach flipped. The counselor called me back 10 minutes later and said, she said yes. The relief hurt and didn't. The box was the size of baker's shoes and covered in Royal Mail tape, those tidy red crowns marching down the seam. The customs form said personal effects in book, and someone had checked gift with a tired pen. We carried it like it might leak. The Rehab still smelled faintly like lemons and HVAC in a microwave that had seen too much soup. My husband held the door with his hip while I signed a form with my name and then wrote it again, smaller, when the first one looked loud. They took us to a room I hadn't been in before with a low couch and one of those fake ficus trees that fools you from certain angles. My friend sat with her hands under her thighs like she was afraid they'd float away. The bracelet was still on her wrist, the small plastic scab of it catching the sleeve of the blue sweater we'd brought. The counselor asked one last time if she wanted to do this now. She nodded so fast it almost wasn't a nod. Inside was a hoodie that smelled like cigarettes rinsed in rain, a spiral notebook with the corners fuzzy and a few pages torn out so clean it felt like a lie, a dog-eared paperback with the spine cracked at the same place twice, and a small envelope addressed to her in a hand so careful it made me ache. On top of the hoodie was a coin on a ball chain, the 60-day chip from somewhere with a lighthouse stamped on it. She touched it like it might burn. She didn't put it on. She held it the way you hold a smooth rock that knows your palm. She slid her thumbnail under the envelope's flap and then stopped. "I want you to read it first," she said, but she didn't look at me, she looked at the space between us, like if she gave the words to the air they wouldn't land so hard. The counselor said maybe it would be better if she read it, and she did, voice even, the way you read the instructions on a fire extinguisher. It wasn't long. He wrote that if she was reading it, he'd run past the fences he kept painting and that made it his decision, not her failure. He wrote he'd done the thing where you turn people you love into furniture sturdy, always there that can't catch you, and he was sorry. He wrote that he loved her like a brother who looks the same in every baby picture, and that wasn't the kind of love she should ever try to drink away. He wrote one line that made my friend put her face in her hands, and breathe like a scraped knee, "Please don't make me in to prove." No one touched her while she cried. That felt important. The counselor set a tissue near her elbow and sat back. My husband looked at his shoelace like it was a mystery and then looked up and met my eyes, and there was that weird small bravery again, the kind that doesn't know it's brave because it's too busy staying. My friend wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said thank you like an apology. She asked if she could keep the chip with her in here, and the counselor said yes, and then my friend looked at me and said, "Quieter, I called your mom." I had to hold my breath to make space for all the ways that could land. "When?" I asked. "Yesterday," she said. "To apologize." I told her I wouldn't call again. I told her I was here. She said she was making soup. My mom feeds every emergency like it's a cold. She said to tell you she bought pears, and do you still like pears? For some reason that undid me more than the letter. I nodded. We like pears again now that they don't taste like airplane whiskey. We brought the photos for the timeline group. The counselor gave us fat crayons with the paper peeled halfway off and a roll of tape that ripped with a noise that felt like starting over. My friend had drawn 3 shaky boxes on a baked sheet of cheap paper, each with a word at the top in her accountant handwriting: before, during, after. She taped a picture of us at 17 on her before I was wearing a shirt I'd long ago and dramatically burned, chip nail polish grinning at a future I couldn't see. She taped our wedding photo in the after box with 3 pieces of tape like she didn't trust any one corner to hold. Wondered during, she put nothing for a long time. Then she dug in the pocket of the blue sweater and pulled out the cutting from the hospital bracelet, the red plastic we'd found on our porch, in an envelope flattened like it had learned a new shape. She taped it there and wrote in small letters next to it, "Alive." That's it. We all stared at that small word until it felt braver than it should be allowed to. On the way out, the counselor handed me a printout and said if my friend decided to transfer to long term, these were some programs that could take her, some of them here, some of them far. Decide is such a blunt tool for a brain learning to hold anything with 2 fingers. We took the list home and put it under a magnet shaped like a strawberry our cat once tried to steal. I made the kind of dinner you can put in the oven and forget sheet pan vegetables and tofu that always tastes like what you want. It too, if you ask nicely. We ate in the quiet way that doesn't mean something is wrong. In the middle of the night, my husband jolted awake so hard the bed made that duck-throated sound. He stared at the ceiling and told me he'd had a using dream so convincing he could tell me what brand of beer the dream had bought. It made my mouth flood in that old way your body remembers even when your head doesn't. He went to the 6:30 a.m. meeting at the donut shop with a flickering O. He brought me back a pink box and a coffee that had gone shy. He leaned in the doorway with powdered sugar dusting his thumb and said, "Still okay." It sounded small. It sounded brave. The cat ate a corner of the donut when we forgot to slide the box shut. He looked like a tiny Victorian child with a crime mustache. That afternoon, my friend's job called. International number lit up my screen, the lone hum on the other end that means the phone is going a distance. Her manager's voice was kind in the cautious way of people who are trying not to break you by accident. They had an employee assistance program. They could freeze her position for 60 days without pay if she wanted, or she could resign, or she could. Her voice did the thing where the sentence trails off because it is too many small turns. I told her I wasn't making decisions for my friend, but I could pass on a message. The counselor called later and said they talked to her about it, and my friend had cried into her elbow and then asked for a pen and circled freeze and wrote 90 after if needed next to it. She meant days. She's not running airports, she's building a house. 2 days later, the counselor called again. She made a decision, she said, same steady cadence as before, like she knows the phone can carry a person if it has to. There's a women's program across town in an old convent with radiators that clink like ghosts and a garden someone keeps getting right in the most stubborn soil. 90 days. No phones for the first 2 weeks. Visiting hours on Sundays in a room with puzzles missing 3 edge pieces by design, I swear. She put me down as an emergency contact and asked that we not come the first Sunday so she can figure out how her face works there without having to borrow mine. I said okay and felt both prouder than I expected and smaller than I wanted to be. On her last night at the airport center, they did an on-site open meeting and asked if any family wanted to sit in. We took wobbly chairs at the back and tried to look like wall art. A woman with a French braid stood up and talked about the month she printed her husband's phone records and highlighted every number she didn't know like it was math that would save her life, and when she sat down she cried into her sleeves. A man my age said he'd stolen back his own keys from the version of himself that kept losing them. My friend didn't speak. She sat with her shoulders up around her ears and kept her palms on her knees like she was teaching herself for her own outline. On the way out she slipped me the 60-day lighthouse chip and said, "Can you put this in a basket for me so it's not around my neck and not in a drawer?" It was specific in a way that made sense to both of us. My husband tucked it in his pocket and said he knew just the basket. The next morning, we drove her to the convent because the rehab van was down. She sat in the back seat like a kid going to a sleepover she wasn't sure she'd like. She looked out the window the whole time and only said one thing when we passed the billboard with a cartoon car insurance lizard: "He looks tired." At the gate, she hugged me like a person who's learned hugging from instructions taped to the wall. She looked at my husband and didn't flinch and said, "I hope you stay okay." He said, "You too." It wasn't poetry. It didn't need to be. At home, I put the list of programs in the drawer with the key and the cut bracelet. The drawer felt a little like a museum and a little like a toolbox. My phone lit up that night with a new number from the conduit line and a voicemail that was mostly a radiator thinking about its sins, and then my friend's voice, thin but there, saying, "Day 1. Here." The next day there was no call because the rule is the rule. The day after, another voicemail, "Day 3. Planted rosemary in the dirt behind the chapel." It smelled like food and forgiveness. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. We went to my husband's meeting that night because that's what we do, a different one than before, in a room that used to be a dance studio, Mirrors covered with old sheets so you don't have to look at yourself unless you want to. He put the licensed house chip in the basket like he was giving it back to the ocean. Someone shared about the first time they ate cereal without a beer and how the crunch sounded like a promise. On the way out, the sky did that evening thing where it remembers how to be blue. My husband took my hand at the elbow light and said it again, a little bigger this time for reasons I can't explain, "We're okay." It still sounded like the bravest thing I've ever heard.